London, who's the second supervisor. And my name is Kees Deers, and I'm the graduation professor. And after that, I will adjourn the meeting, and we will probably go back and we will be back in some 50 minutes, and then we will say what we think about all the stuff, right? Okay, Yvo, good luck.
Yeah.
There you go.
Welcome everybody to my thesis defense. I have a lot to tell you, so let's get to it. I'm going to tell you something about how you can develop a responsible innovation system, and what that exactly is, we'll get to. These are the contents of my presentation. I will not read them out, but you can review them on the left side of each slide. And also pay attention to the green frames, they will come throughout the presentation. And when I'm talking and there's a green frame, you should be focusing on that. Now, let's get to the problem. There's in the whole world more than 1 billion people that still need to be electrified. And it's a process that is happening, and it's going faster every day. But the technology that is needed for that is called rural energy technology. And innovation is not only needed on the technology, but also on new policies, community acceptance, business models, things such as that. And you need quite a lot of different actors for that to happen. And those actors come from various institutions like government, industry, university, or civil society. And together they form a system of innovators, or an innovation system. And their activities need to be aligned so that the collective innovation process, so that everything they do is done in a coherent way. And while each of the actors might have good intentions, collective irresponsibility might prevail, which can lead to unfavorable outcomes. And an example of that is actually nuclear technology, which until today threatens the world peace. Ironically also meant to solve the world's power problems. But how do we determine the collective responsibility of an innovation system? And that has led me to my research question: how can a framework assess and guide the collective innovation process in innovation systems? And a set of sub-questions that are also represented in the chapters on the left. Now, my methodology looks very complicated, but it's actually 3 phases. The first one in the Netherlands, determining the framework, then going to India for a case study with the framework, and then back in the Netherlands, rounding up the research and evaluating the results. So, what is a responsible innovation system? And actually, I found out that the definition of this doesn't exist. So I was the one who had to come up with the definition, and I did that by splitting the question up in 2. So what is a responsible innovation, and what is an innovation system? So first, what is responsible innovation? And it appears that there is a framework available for this. And it says that if you apply, it's called responsible innovation, fortunately, and it says that if you apply the following 4 dimensions to your research process, the outcome or the process itself becomes more responsible. Anticipation, asking what if, looking to the future. Reflexivity, what is my role, what is your role, and what does it mean? Inclusion, are all the stakeholders participating? And responsiveness, do I have the capacity to react to evolving situations? Now, in trying to find the connections to what this means in a systemic environment, I went through the literature and I found a certain set of characteristics that an innovation system needs to have before it can become responsible, which was those 4 dimensions I mentioned just now, applied in an evolutionary environment where the group of institutions remains the same throughout the process, and open knowledge transfer is accounted for or can be done. Now, what is an innovation system? And for that I actually went into the historical literature of innovation and knowledge creation, and it appears that traditional knowledge creation takes the form of a tree when we take inspiration from nature. It behaves more linearly and is more centralized, so often from a university. Now, modern knowledge creation takes more the form of a rhizome, which for example is ginger or bamboo. And it's more dynamic, more decentralized, and actually, yeah, I think it can be clear that the last form of knowledge creation is more applicable to the situation that we need. So what modern innovation approaches are there? And here you see what an innovation system can look like, a set of actors with relations. And I found three approaches that do modern knowledge production, so to say. And I will discuss all three of them. So first, systems of innovation, and this was the first one to define as an innovation system as a set of factors that influence innovation. But the researchers that made the image you see actually found that going from an emerging innovation system to a mature innovation system cannot really be explained with this theory. So it doesn't have evolutionary dynamics. And also there's no constant group of institutions prescribed. It's just a number of actors working. Also open knowledge transfer wasn't accounted for. And the next theory actually can solve that problem. It is an evolutionary theory. It's called triple helix. It has evolutionary dynamics and a constant group of institutions, namely government, industry, and university, each creating political, economic, and human capital. And why is it evolutionary? Because if one of these spheres is weaker, the others can take over its responsibilities on the intersections and therefore become bigger and smaller and start turning around each other, therefore becoming a helix, like the DNA helix, turning around each other. However, there's not the relations between these institutions are not really well defined yet, and there's also no public participation. It doesn't account for the end user to influence innovation, and that is why the quadruple helix was formed. Very convenient, adds the public and civil society as an extra institution, an extra decision-making type of actor, and it creates social capital. Now, adding this this institution, it shows that those intersections become much more complex. It's much more intersections suddenly. But the makers say that this is actually what a knowledge democracy should look like. And it's a very fancy word, but it's something we are living in. And knowledge is everywhere, it's available. But still, no description of relations. And that's where open innovation comes in. And open innovation is actually best described comparing it to closed innovation, which is the traditional R&D in companies or universities. And open innovation actually says the boundaries of the company become permeable and allow for influences of outside to help in the innovation process, and therefore maybe creating more different types of innovations. However, little is known about open innovation in large networks. Specifically, intellectual property becomes difficult. And it's also found that not completely open or closed is the most beneficial, but actually somewhere in between. The company should be semi-open to have the most effective process. And that's a difficult thing to establish. Now, but this openness does show some characteristics with the image we actually saw earlier. So it's becoming more decentralized. So it might be clear that all these three approaches don't really have all the characteristics that is needed for a responsible innovation system. But a framework is needed, so what should such a framework look like? And if you've paid a little attention, each of these approaches has complementary disadvantages or advantages, and combining them could make a responsible innovation system. And by combining them, I was able to define a responsible innovation system as an open knowledge network that allows for the quadruple helix to emerge and the regional innovation system to develop, while the dimensions of anticipation, reflexivity, inclusion, and responsiveness are internally and mutually shared among the actors. Now, the result of that is this. It's a framework divided in three elements: the components, the relations, and the functions. And in the components, you see the quadruple helix again. So all the institutions and the intersections become the components. In the relations you see open innovation, which is the two-way knowledge flow that we talked about earlier. And the functions is represented in 3 virtual spaces. The knowledge space, which is formed when knowledge creation is done. The innovation space is formed when the combination of knowledge is done. And the consensus space is formed when those dimensions of responsible innovation, so anticipation, reflexivity and responsiveness, are found in the actors and their relations. And I don't say inclusion, because inclusion is actually in the components part. So, okay, this becomes a little bit abstract, I realize, but bear with me, it will become clear. This is actually the first iteration you see of the framework. During and after the case study, I found that the collective innovation process actually has a lot of different activities, and collecting data from the collective innovation process should be segmented in 3 phases, or can be segmented in 3 phases. And that is the exploration, the construction, and the implementation phase. And for each phase, I used a different data collection method, as we will see later in the case study. But before we can go to that case study, we need to know what to research. What is the context we are working in? So what are the characteristics of rural energy technology in India? And first, what is rural energy technology? And in the literature and in practice, actually, the following 4 technologies are part of the umbrella term rural energy technology, which is small household charging, solar home lighting, solar home systems, and various types of grids. Pico, nano, micro, there's a lot of terms. And India, and why India? Well, because of those more than 1 billion people, almost a quarter live in India. So when we talk about potential impact, India is by far the leading country where serious transformation can be done. Now, I analyzed those the context through through the lens of the framework, and there's a lot of information here. Oh. Let's hope. There's a lot of information here, but what's important is I think it's logging up. Here we are. Yes. Okay. What's important is the following. The energy service company is actually defined by the government as the actor that is responsible for the economic exploitation of rural energy technology. But what I found is that that role of the energy service company is actually filled up by social enterprises, which are actors that both create economic and social capital. And they are operating on the boundary between industry and civil society. And I chose this actor as the start of my research as a participant, so I approached them. And in the case study, which I will explain now, and just to remember, the approach is those 3 phases we talked about earlier, so the exploration, the construction, and the implementation phase, analyzed through the lens of the framework, so the components, the relations, and the functions. So for each phase, I will go over the components, relations, and functions. Now, for the exploration phase, I visited 4 events, among which an event was a public hearing of policy from the government. I will get back to that one later. And the construction phase, I interviewed 17 organizations, of which 13 social enterprises, IP, which are there, the green one, in the image. And I also questioned 4 other organizations that are active in those spheres. And on this image you can see where in India they are active. Now, in the implementation phase, I visited 5 projects in the field, really talking to the end users, to the customers, and their perceptions of the technologies they were using. Now, so back to the results, and again, exploration, construction, and implementation phases expressed in components, relations, and functions. And in the exploration phase, this is one of the events. You can see me sitting there, sitting next to a director of data power. These were some serious guys, and there was some serious conversation happening. And what I found throughout all the events that government and industry were actually present everywhere, while the government event itself, so the public hearing on policies, was not inclusive at all. There was no university or no civil society present, which, talking about new policies, is a bit weird. And again, yeah, public civil society was the most distant institution of all. And in the relations, I found that half of the events have two-way knowledge flows, so we can't really say anything about that. Well, yeah, we can, but. And in the functions, the question is, are there inclusive and open knowledge, innovation, and consensus spaces? And yes, actually, this event ticked all the boxes of a responsible event, if you want to call it that. Only thing, this was a one-time event, and next year this event will not take place anymore. Then the construction phase. And these are all the organizations I researched. So one of them, Rule Spark, of which the delegate Rob is here. Well, not really for it. And yeah, this is the result. There's a lot of information here. But what do we see? And the image on the left is actually the innovation system that I could expose. So all the actors I questioned and their relations and the interconnections between them. And each color of note is a different institution or a different intersection of the quadruple helix. And you can see the percentages of how much they are present in the system as well. And this one shows that even better. So the darker blue means the more of this institution was present, was available. And since we started in the IP area, you would expect more of those institutions, but you can also see that there are quite a few gaps in the innovation system still to be filled. Now, in the relations, it was actually very difficult to determine whether there was two-way knowledge flow. What I could determine was the amount of contact the actors had. And the purple are at least, or purple or pink is at least monthly contact. And what you can see from here is there's actually a few projects that are a bit detached from the rest of the system, which means that when we are talking about knowledge flow and information, basically, they don't really know what's going on. You would expect they know less. Then in the construction phase, I left out the knowledge and innovation spaces for now, but the consensus space. So each blue relation you see here is a responsible one. It has those dimensions of responsible innovation. And what we can see is that not all relations are blue, definitely, but there is a part where there is a lot of blue. And actually in the middle of that you see CLEAN, the Clean Energy Access Network, which was the result of a consensus forming of all those actors in that hub there. They all decided, okay, let's look to the future, let's look at our roles, and let's see what we need to create before we can come up with something new. And they found out that CLEAN was an organization that is missing in the system. So it's actually a very good result if you look at it from a responsibility perspective. Now, so what did we find? Well, in the components, there's, I didn't tell you this, but there's only a few Indian universities in the system. So human capital, which the university creates, is not really well created. Also, the expected government agencies from the institutional analysis were actually not that well found. The regulatory committees, the state nodal agencies, doesn't tell you much now, but they should be present and they weren't. And also the multi-institutional organizations that I researched were not that inclusive as their mission statements would say. And in the relations, so as we saw, some projects were islanded, Those government organizations that were present, they all cluster around a few organizations. So there's only a few organizations that really have contact to the government, which means that there's limited capacity for the different capitals to flow around. And in the functions, we saw that those dimensions of responsible innovations were poorly shared, but that clean is at the center of a consensus hub, so to say. Now, the field visits. So I visited 5 projects in the field, talking to the people. And what we found from that is that actually none of those 5 projects was fully inclusive. None created all the capitals that you would need for a responsible innovation system. And government and university were the least visible of this. And in relations, actually, all projects had two-way communication flow. So this is actually, again, a good sign. Everyone was talking to their own customers, trying to help them implement it. And in the functions relating to the government and university, the political and human capital creation lacks on the local level. There was only one project that creates knowledge and innovation, and the consensus spaces were only vaguely visible. None of them was fully responsible, but a few were getting there. And also part of the results is actually the applicability of the framework, because the main question is about the framework, not about the responsibility of the system. So how well could the framework be used? And when we look at the 3 phases, the exploration phase seems the one that's most applicable to use the framework in. Why? Because if you remember that I told you that there's a tension between the openness and the effectiveness of an organization. In the exploration phase, the openness is actually something that is required. So being open doesn't hinder your exploration, even it helps it. But in the construction and implementation phases, being open can hinder your processes. It can you can show your knowledge to your competitors, for example. So being responsible means becoming less responsible, which is a paradox, and that's something that needs to be solved. And also there was a lot of information that we could see, a lot of gaps in the cooperation of institutions, which means that there's the values and the objectives of those institutions are not being included in the innovations. So that is a serious problem, and that it's good that the framework shows that. But yeah, before we can really say something about the research as well, we need to look at how valid are the results, how valid was the framework itself, what are the limitations that it creates, and what recommendations can we derive from that. And don't try to read too much from this image, but this is the framework that I used for the validity, and these are the results. And you see quite a lot of red there, which means not good. But a lot of them are operational, but one of them I want to discuss with you here, which is rhizomatic legitimation. Now you see the image again, and you might understand why I showed you this. And what rhizomatic legitimation says, as soon as you have these decentralized maps, so to say, and you start researching them, like I did with this one, for example, you cannot really say anything about the other parts of the system. So that means that my results are not generalizable to the rest of the system. And that means that you have to get some results about the system, you have to research everyone in the system, which is almost an undoable job. Now, the recommendations from that, well, there should be more intersections of the system researched, and especially when that happens, the central actors of government and university should be included for this research to become whole. Also, other parts of the energy sector can be researched, since that's somewhat merging with the rural energy sector, and also separate segments of the rural energy technology sector itself. So those 4 different technologies. There's also another validation or generalization that I want to discuss, which is the temporal generalization. And it says, is the framework still relevant in the future? And I believe that we are in a globally connected the system through our ecology. And the value of nature should be accounted for in innovations. Which means that we need an extra institution in those processes, which should be the natural environment. And that means that we are extending the quadruple helix actually to the quintuple helix. It makes it 5 instead of 4. And this is, of course, easier said than done. How do you conceptualize nature as an actor? So there's a lot of things to be done there, a lot of recommendations still open. But how can we now use this? Because actually we already are using this. We've started Energy Bazaar together with Dirk and Ritima, and we are applying actually the framework that I've created here and trying to build on it further. And trying to account for each of these institutions. And we are already determining our activities, the impact we make, our partners and the board of advisors through this framework. So we are using it. And that brings me to the conclusion of this framework. How can a framework assess and guide the responsibility of the collective innovation process in innovation systems? Well, by analyzing the different phases of the collective innovation process through the components, relations and functions, meaningful insights will be derived. It's already used for decision making now in organizations, but can possibly be used for more. For example, how a policy is designed or events are designed. And it appears to be a good first step in assessing and guiding systemic responsibility. We're not there yet at all, but it appears to be a good step because there's still several operational issues to be solved. And that concludes my presentation. And some room for thought, some Indian proverbs, and it's a bit cheesy, I know. But, it really helped me to. I really feel that this covers what I've been working on. So that's all. Okay.
Extensive, impressive presentation. As I said, please raise your hands if you have questions. And again, stupid questions don't exist. You can also ask questions about things that are not clear. Yes, sir, in the back.
Thanks for the presentation, it was really good. I have just one question. With this innovation method or methodology you talked about, would it help the national soccer team of Holland get to the World Championship?
Well, I think we can apply a lot of research on that part, but I think this is a sinking ship. No institutions can be set up anymore to get it. Thanks.
Yes.
Yeah. Yvo, thanks for your presentation. One question at slide 34. You stated that you researched 2 IP institutions and a couple of GIPA. Yes. Oh, 13 IP. Yeah. What was sort of your decision? How did you make the decision to only research IP, a lot of IP, and focus not on the other ones?
Yeah. What I quickly saw is that you cannot research everything. Even though I did try to get governments and universities in research as well, but there was not really a lot of response. So, and I also went for them because they are closest to the people themselves. So through those social enterprises, I could also arrange the field visits that I did. So that, and also part of that I was connected to Rural Spark, for who I did my internship, and I decided to stay around their activities, and they are such a social enterprise. So that's.
And does it impact the results at the end?
Yeah. This is something that in my report I mentioned that there could be a bias between me and Rural Spark and the rest. So what I tried is to be as objective as possible, and maybe Rob can say if I was or not. But the bias that could be there is that I probably saw more of Rural Spark than the other ones. So if anything, I think the Rural Spark results are more truthful than the others. But yeah, it's a point of discussion.
Thanks, Yvo. I enjoyed a lot working with you in India. I think you were objective. But a small question, like, could you have applied this framework, or could you have also chosen a different case study? Maybe it's closer to home. Why all the way to India? Why exactly this case study?
No, yeah, that's because of that impact that I was talking about. I really feel that if we want to change our energy world, so to say, it doesn't help trying to change the Dutch energy system. It's better to prevent such a system from emerging in India, or anywhere else. The Energy Plus Star project doesn't only focus on India. We want to go all around. But yeah, in terms of impact, India, that was my decision why. But what do you mean from another case study?
I mean,
like in
I
a
think we researched the framework and used a case study for applying it and get some validation and results. But you can apply this framework to many situations, right?
Yeah.
So maybe there's some like in the Netherlands also these kind of projects.
To be honest, it would be very complete if I had done a case study in the Netherlands as well. Yeah, would be actually very good for the results. But I didn't. Yeah. So.
What would you have gained with that then?
Well, those contextual value differences. For example, actually in India those institutions are very well formed. But if you, for example, take Africa, where universities don't really exist, yeah, it brings completely different dynamics because someone else has to do the human capital creation. Yeah, I really know what would have come out of that.
Sorry, I interrupted your question.
That's okay.
Were they validly answered?
Sorry?
Were they validly answered?
Yes.
Yes, madam.
I have a little question about Celco,
Yeah.
because in your image it said it didn't have any communication, or even less than. Which was it? I think it's no back. It was in the 6 in the case study somewhere.
But there's no Celco there.
No, the big network.
It's,
Oh, in the network you mean?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, okay. It's,
I didn't write the number down. Well, one of those. It said that Celco, here, this one, has less than monthly contact.
Yeah.
Okay.
This,
but on the next one, you said it's very responsible. It ticked all the boxes.
Celco.
Yeah.
That's clean actually. I think.
Oh,
Yeah, Celco.
Here.
Oh, here, yeah.
Yeah.
That's. Oh yeah, I understand your question now. Yeah. This is because, and this is a problem that's been, throughout actually the questionnaire, that the companies weren't as responsive as you might want them to be. So I divided the questionnaire in 5 parts, and I called them and I emailed them and I explained them and tried to do my best. But some of them just filled in half of the questionnaire or not. So what in the case of Celco, they did answer the part on the responsible innovation questions, but they didn't answer the part of the monthly contact. So what I should actually have done is the same as the pollinate energy. I should have left them out here.
Yeah.
But
Okay,
yeah,
okay,
that's what I should have
another
done here. Yeah. Sure.
Okay.
Okay, thanks. Yes.
As you mentioned by now, people's questions, a lot of things that you found hard in the field, like these of people not, the companies not answering your questions the way you expected them to, and like when you're in the field, for sure you find a lot of other things that it's not as you expected. Could you tell us what difficulties you found in the field that made you, because for research?
To be honest, in the field it went pretty smooth. Contradicting what you expect, because I had an employee from Rural Spark coming with me as an interpreter, Shazet, wonderful guy, and also a really smart guy, and he also understood what I was trying to find. And I discussed this with him up front, And so we really went there together, and often he was the one doing the talking, and I was just there writing it down because he exactly knew what my questions were to them, and that also because he's very known in the area. He really knows how to talk to people, how to get the right. He even said to me once, "Okay, this answer you shouldn't trust because it's probably not true." So that way, the field visits were actually went very well. I didn't. The only thing is that we had an angry cab driver because the roads were very bad. But the field visits actually not a lot of problems. Yeah, amazing.
Did you have any challenge, like not even in the field, but in the whole process? Did you have challenge?
The challenge is actually relating to the question of my mom. The integrity. You can see it in this one. Actually, if you look to the top right, there's an extra validity, and the red one, the integrity, which I added to the framework because often the answers were just not integer. They weren't true. I even found from some companies that the partners they gave me they weren't true. So it was so hard trying to find all the truthfulness in everything, and it made it hard, but also made me understand India really well, and also how to approach them. One of the things I did was create sort of a communication strategy based on the values of the culture, and I found that what they value is actually sort of a community feel. So I always stressed in my emails that what I was doing was not for me, but it was for India. It was for everyone. It was making everyone better. And when I started doing that, actually the responses became much better. So that was learning.
Room for one final question.
Who's actually responsible for creating a responsible innovation system?
The system itself, and that makes it much more difficult. But what I've tried to do, I haven't said this one is responsible, but I've tried to pose this task clean a bit in my research. I've called them the guardian of the system in a separate subsection, and in the email that I'm going to send to them with this report, I'm really going to stress to them that they are the actor in the best position to do this. And then it's up to them to take up that task. But I would prefer clean to eat, but government also has a large role to play. But
And if you generalize that, you would also pick like all kind of umbrella organizations, or how does it depend on?
Well, if anything, it should be an organization that's in that GPU part, so in the middle, because they are the best position to include all the institutions. But it doesn't necessarily have to be. For example, USAID, as you know, is a very important organization, and that's more of a GPU organization, but they do a lot. So
any type of actor could pick this role, or
it could, but preferably someone that's more neutral. Like a government is never completely neutral. There's also a very lack of trust in government, especially on a local level. So government taking up that role would first need to create a lot of this actually relates to something I have in my appendix, which is this one. These are actually the conditions for a responsible innovation system, and one of them you see here is mutual trust. So before a responsible innovation system can emerge, mutual trust needs to be established, and between local inhabitants and the government, this trust is not there. So before the government could take up that role, this needs to be faced. But does that answer the question?
Yeah, nobody is ever neutral, so it's hard to find a way to.
That's true.
But that's okay.
That's true.
So I'm having good news.
Okay, thank you very much for this. I like this always very much to start with this, and I would like to switch to the second supervisor, Ms. Esselman.
Thank you very much. Yvo, thank you for your presentation, really nice. I have a question
questions on your Energy Bazaar initiative. I am very curious, because you wrote down in your report that the results of your thesis actually contributed with insights to how you started this up.
Yeah.
Could you have started this initiative without this thesis project, first of all? And secondly, can you elaborate a bit more on what exactly brought insight, what the insights actually are and how they contribute to the value proposition of your business?
So 2 questions. Could I have done it without this research and how does it contribute? Well, could I have done it without? No, because I got the idea in India while being in field visits, where I saw that one of the farmers had actually a lot of potential to share energy, which he didn't. I was there because of the research, and that's where the idea came from. But I was looking for an idea nevertheless, so I think I would have maybe started something even if I wasn't doing this research. But so how did it contribute? And actually, already during the internship report I did before this study, I found that the biggest barriers to the implementation of rural energy technology are not technological or even financial. It's institutional. It's really how everyone is cooperating, how everyone is talking to each other or not talking to each other.
Yeah.
So with that insight, I actually started this research, and that's also how we are trying to operate with Energy Bazaar, trying to include all those institutions, trying to talk to the policy advocacy groups, trying to talk to the team Delft for maybe Nishant will be in our board of advisors. We've asked him. So really trying to get all these institutions together to have sustainable innovations such as the makers of the quintuple helix say it. I know it's not completely sustainable in the entrepreneurship perspective, but we really have gone into this. Okay, so let's see where are the pain points and what should be done first. Just to, because what we try to do is increase energy access, democratize energy ownership, and maintain responsible innovation. Those are the 3 pillars of the project. And whatever is necessary, of those institutions, we do. Basically, that's.
And how are you going to make use of the framework?
Well, firstly, we are now doing it with the partners. So we are really selecting partners, trying to select partners from each of those institutions, and also in the word of advice, what it says here. But the framework itself, as we've said, is not finished yet. And that's why the academic part is very important still. It would be, my dream is maybe a bit too much, but I would really like it if someone could maybe take over this research now and start trying to see what is that, how do we conceptualize nature in this, and how can we generate impact indicators from that in our project. Basically, so trying to get step by step getting there.
And do you believe that from this work the framework might change?
Oh yeah,
New
definitely.
insights will
I expect it to change, but that's the evolutionary perspective. So I expect it to change every day. Even now, we've been participating in a hackathon where we need to generate, say, our impact indicators. So then we come back to the question: how do we measure the impact of nature in this? So it's already changing actually.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, next one. So supervisors, please.
Okay. Thank you for your very clear presentation. My first question is about the international aspect of the networks that you investigated. You just mentioned USAID, and of course Rural Spark is also an international actor. You don't go into that in your story.
Yeah.
Would you say that having, for example, in a very important nodal point, an international actor or a domestic actor, that's completely the same or not?
It's. I didn't expect this question because I have a map of actually this map, but then showing the international and domestic actors. Well, imagine this, it would be more 50-50. So I have asked whether this international was an international organization or a domestic organization, and I found that it was more or less 50-50, and that even inside the center of the framework it was also a bit 50-50. So and that comes again to Quintuple being a globally connected environment. I really feel that the rural, and we even see it already, that all the projects in Africa are being tried in India, or people are talking about that. So it would be better if there is at least a great number of international organizations that can transfer the knowledge to other parts of the world. But it shouldn't be too much, because then you are not responsive to change anymore. So there should be a balance. Exactly like the openness of an organization, it's also the openness of a country, so to say, actually. So yeah, there is a balance, but what exactly that balance is, I can say, and I think there needs to be more research for it.
Okay. Because I could also expect that the input of local characteristics and demand side characteristics would get less if the aim would be to have one global network with a number of global actors transferring knowledge globally.
No, I don't want to get it back to Energy Bazaar, but what we want to do there, for example, is have that quintuple helix in every country that we work with, so local partners with every project, and only that way we can really get to the people, and you shouldn't expect that there's a one solution for everything, especially in renewable energy technology. Even within India, every village is different, and that's what we are actually combining with Ritima. I'm not sure if you know her, but she's done a social policy analysis on the increase of prosumers in a village. So what types of policies will increase prosumers? And there you see that different social dynamics create different outcomes. So we are trying to grab her research and put it in us, and therefore accounting for those local demand responses. I'm not sure if it answers the question.
Yeah, thank you. Do I have time?
Yes, you have.
Yeah. My second question is about further research.
Mm-hmm.
In your slide, you said, well, other parts of the system should also be included, and in your thesis, you say, well, the framework should be validated using other cases. But, and just in response to Esther, you said this quintuple helix aspect would be really the next step. But if there would come a next master student that would start from your framework, would you then also say, well, there are certain parts of my framework that are maybe a bit weaker than the rest, and they should be, let's say, upgraded first before the next step can be made?
Yeah, so an actor putting it in a box of IP, into industry and policy, there's a lot of different types of actors that can be put in that box. For example, impact investors and social enterprises both come into that box. So actually the differentiation between those is not well done by the framework. So the characteristics of components should be changed, and that relates to the improving characteristics of components here. And I advise another student to well, maybe not only look into that, but also look into that, and to see how can we differentiate that. And I think functions of innovation systems is the first area I would look at. So yeah.
For the differentiation of similar actors, you mean?
So the impact investor and the social enterprise, they have both the same institutional configuration, but they have different functions in the system. So with functions of innovation system, you can differentiate them further.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, now my turn to ask a couple of things. Yes, let me start with, can you go to slide 8, please? slide? No, then I'm wrong. There is a slide in which you formulate.
And there was 9 before.
Yes, that's it.
Okay.
That's it. It's 7. Sorry, my fault. Sorry. Your research question is: how can a framework assess and guide responsibility to collective innovation process in innovation system? That's a huge question. That's a huge question. And we can also see that the things you're working with are huge. And also, you go to India. Well, the gentleman on the left side asked already the question: why did you go to India and not, for instance, to the Netherlands or whatever? Country where things are maybe a bit differently arranged and fit better to existing theories of innovation systems. But that doesn't matter. But why do you ask the question? How can a framework assess? Because I would say you can immediately also you want to build a framework, right? You can also say, okay, what kind of framework? So why did you choose for this question and not for what kind of framework? Because you're going to build a framework because you want to get your fingers behind what's going on.
Yeah.
Why did you ask that question?
I think asking the question this way, it allows for a much deeper analysis of, is such a framework maybe already available? So how can it be? It also opens up the window for maybe approaches that are already looking at or are available that can describe a responsible innovation system. And the literature study is quite extensive in the report as well.
But you can, I think, because there is a lot of literature on innovation systems, particularly for developed countries, for rich countries. You can start with a framework over there, adapt it, and then apply it right away, and then you have a framework. Or is that, or am I going too fast?
Yeah, for me maybe, yeah, because this question only in the last stages of the project it became this question. Actually, it started with how can actors collaborate with different types of people. So I started from way over there and ended up here after the whole journey, basically. So for me, this question described the journey better than just just create a framework. I think if I have to explain it, but I didn't do that before, so.
Okay, that's okay. That's fine. Then because I'm going to look at the time because I'm also yes, I have time for asking a question. Slide 25. Here you go. I hope that I picked the right one. Yes, what you said here when you presented this slide, you said that this whole collective innovation process consists of phases. You construct these phases, and then you say two things. You started with saying it should consist of these phases, and then you said, oh no, it can consist of these phases. And I got a little nervous because because it looks like an escape. Why didn't you stick to what should?
No,
because
I
that's
said it
more
wrong.
Sorry?
It should have been can. I said it wrong because the phases are not made in stone. It could be.
It should be can.
It should be can.
It
should be can.
Not,
I correct
it should
myself.
not be should.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, please. Why is that?
Because when I got the insight of that the collective innovation process should be segmented, I went into literature again, looking for how can it be segmented, and all the segmentation process. I think I found 5 different versions of segmentating an innovation process, and it was all done on the innovation process of one organization, and there was nothing about the collective innovation process. So I really had to come up with this myself, and I also pushed it a bit in the direction of my data collection processes and what I could research. But I'm very aware that these are not the only phases that you can think of. There could be a design phase, for example, included as well. So one of my I think I did in the recommendations too is also say, okay, look at this again, because this is not set in stone. It's really only a suggestion of dividing.
Okay, but Yvo, what have you gained then? If anything goes.
Yeah, the main thing I gained from this was the structure of the results.
Yeah, but the structure of the results is influenced by the choice you make for the phases. I
Yeah.
think. So that means that if I come up with different phases, I get different results. So
Uh,
how can you test it? If that's true, what I'm saying, how can you test in your framework in a scientific way?
So it could be that it's bad to have different results, but then it's another iteration of the framework.
It is not bad to have different results, but it is, I think if you have a framework, you want to come up with certain results that are stable. And when you do scientific research, and you do, then it should be repeated, and in the end, you should come out. You should come at the same results. And I know this is not physics, this is not rocket science. I do realize that, but a bit of that should be there.
Yeah. Well, in my opinion, I think the basic structure of segmentation is captured in this. And if there would be another segmentation of the phases, it would divide the construction phase into two. So the exploration and the implementation phase, they remain the same. And the construction phase might be made up of several parts now, so they are merged. So the results of the construction phase would be the least stable, but I think the exploration and implementation phase will remain the same. Okay. And the results stable.
Okay, thank you. And then my last question. Well, you've done a lot of work, without doubt, and I think a lot of interesting things too. If you look back now, what you've done, it's a lot of work. You said already when I introduced you, they already said it's almost a year or something like that. What would you do differently in such a way that the results are you could be more satisfied with the results, because researchers are always not satisfied with the results. You're not the only one. I'm also never satisfied. That you are either more satisfied with your results, or that you were able to speed up the process, that you could do it, say, in 7 months or whatever.
Yeah.
What would you do differently? Two things.
Well, what I
can only mention two things.
What I would have liked to go better is to go to India with a better developed framework, because still the framework was a bit developing when I went to India. I wasn't completely set, okay, this is it. So next time, before going into the research, I would do, I would want a better structured organization, and therefore also structuring my questionnaire better, and also knowing better who to interview. Because now, I sort of went a bit like this, just grabbing everyone that I could in my research and try to structure it in the end. And now next time I would structure it before and then just do clean data collection part. That's one.
You can also stick to one if you think this is the main message.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that I can say still, but yeah.
But then you can add one to it. So
well, maybe what Rob suggested, trying to find a different case study as well, so like another context.
In addition to it.
In addition, yeah. If I would have structured myself better and had more time,
then it would take more time.
Then but I would use the same time, but do more. Yeah.
Okay. That's also possible. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Meeting. I think we'll be back in 10, 15 minutes or something.
Ja.